Armadillos are no doubt one of the strangest mammals on Earth. They are the only warm-blooded animals to have shells, are almost exclusively insectivorous, and have the lowest metabolic rates of all placental mammals. This distinctiveness makes their evolutionary history hard to figure out, as they really aren't like any other creature on Earth. And looking at the fossil record has shown us that in the past they were even stranger, with very different lifestyles and sizes. So where did they come from in the first place? Why did they evolve a shell? And what drove the now extinct species to the brink? Armadillos belong to a group of animals called Xenarthra, which they share with the other unique South American animals, the anteaters and sloths. Together, these creatures represent one of the most ancient and peculiar branches of the mammalian family tree. The group armadillos belong to is known as Cingulata, and is the oldest of the Xenarthrans, diverging over 60 million years ago. Despite being exclusively tied to the Americas today, their origin story begins in Africa. The Xenarthrans first appeared when Africa and South America were much closer to each other, still bearing the scars of their Gondwanan past. Africa too has its own group of mammals that are not closely related to any others, the Afrotheria, which includes things like aardvarks, elephants and manatees. These two groups once formed a single population of animals that split from other mammals around 100 million years ago. When Africa and South America began to move away from each other, they became isolated. The Afrotheria evolved in more predictable ways, but Xenarthra retained their primitive morphology. Recent molecular clock analysis shows that Afrotheria and Xenarthra diverged from one another around 90 million years ago, well after the continents had already separated, meaning they likely colonized the island continent via overwater dispersal, perhaps on floating vegetation mats or through island hopping during times when sea levels were lower. The name Xenarthra itself hints at what makes them unique, as it translated to strange joints, referring to the very robust joints in their hind legs. This adaptation freed their forelimbs up for digging. All Xenarthrans are either burrowing animals themselves, or in the case of sloths, have many burrowing animals in their ancestry. But what truly sets Xenarthrans apart is their extreme distance from all other placental mammals. As a result, they have the lowest metabolic rate of any therian mammal, even lower than the marsupials, only being beaten by the egg-laying platypus and echidnas. This sounds like a disadvantage, but as it turns out, this slow metabolism is actually the driving force behind their success. They need very little food, can survive in low oxygen, high altitude environments, and their naturally low body temperatures make them suited for hot areas. It was also necessary for the development of their most distinct feature, but we'll get to that later. The earlier fossil record of armadillos is quite poor. The earliest records are late Paleocene to early Eocene, isolated remains from the southeastern Brazil, possibly representing Rheastagotherium or Utatus, primitive armadillos from around 60 to 58 million years ago. Such Eocene fossils are limited to isolated cingulate osteoderms, bony plates that form their shells. No complete cingulate skulls appear until the late Middle Eocene, roughly 40 million years ago. Stem Xenarthrans were likely myrmecophagous, meaning specialized ant and termite feeders. Their low population densities and preference for tropical habitats explain the sparse pre-Eocene record. Tropical environments are notoriously bad for fossil preservation. The warm, humid conditions and acidic soils rapidly decompose organic material, leaving us with frustratingly few clues about what bridged the gap between the pilosans, the sloths and anteaters, and the armored armadillos. The earliest fossils already had shells, making it impossible to know precisely how armor first evolved. Although we do know why armadillos evolved shells, to protect against predators. The real question is why so few other mammals took this route. The mutation that would kickstart shell development is probably quite rare. Most animals escape predators by becoming faster, more camouflaged, or more agile. These strategies deliver immediate survival benefits even in their earlier stages, as a slightly faster animal has better odds than its slower siblings. However, a tiny patch of bony skin offers no such advantage. You need substantial coverage before armor becomes worth the metabolic investment of growing and maintaining it. But the armadillo's slow metabolism changed this calculus entirely. Although they can be quick in short bursts, sustained speed was never going to be their evolutionary path. The onset of shell development likely occurred via random mutations that thickened skin ossifications. With their metabolic constraints making a speed-based defense strategy difficult, armor became the viable alternative. This pattern repeats across the animal kingdom. Countless slower metabolism reptiles like turtles and thorny devils have evolved armor, while few mammals have. Early armadillo shells were flexible with mobile bands. Over time, different lineages showed different reinforcement trends. Some led to the fused domes in glyptodonts, which were completely immobile, while others like the peltophilids and living armadillos retained mobility. And whilst the adaptation of a shell was extremely difficult to get, once they evolved it, they immediately diversified into a remarkable array of forms and lifestyles. One of the strangest families was the now extinct Peltophilidae. Among the earliest to split, they diverged from other families all the way back in the Paleocene 57 million years ago. This makes them by far the most distinct armadillos, though at roughly 11 kilograms they were fairly small. One feature that sets them apart are the horns on their heads, thought to be used between males in competition. Their large sharp teeth sparked significant debate about whether they were carnivores. Although today an omnivorous or even herbivorous lifestyle is accepted, many suspect they filled a niche of digging for tough plant material, supported by studies of their limb morphology which show they were well suited to digging, though not as much as the extreme burrowers of today. They were successful for a long time, peaking at around 12 species during the Miocene. The last known remains date to 9 million years ago in Argentina. This decline was driven by aridification of their habitats, which favored species more suited for grazing. Being the most basal family, they give important clues into the early history of armadillos, suggesting that they were much more generalist in the past. Many questions remain because only fragments of their shells and dentation are known, making their exact ecological role hard to decipher. Then the families Dasypodidae and Clemaphoridae diverged, not long after armadillos first evolved in the Eocene. Dasypodidae is now only represented by the genus Dasypus, which is made up of 8 species. These include the southern long-nosed armadillo, the greater long-nosed armadillo, the hairy long-nosed armadillo, the northern long-nosed armadillo, the 7-banded armadillo, the 9-banded armadillo, and the elusive Younger's lesser long-nosed armadillo. Although opportunistic feeders, they get most of their food from insects, with only 7% of their diet being plant matter. 2 extinct species are also known from this genus. One of them, the beautiful armadillo, survived until 11,000 years ago and was almost identical to the 9-banded armadillo, but 2.5 times as large and covered in more robust armor. Dozens of other genera from Dasypodidae are known, most from the Miocene. One Utatus, a fairly large armadillo, lived as recently as 7,500 years ago in Argentina. The Clemaphoridae, on the other hand, were the most diverse and numerous branch of armadillos. Evolutionary relationships among them remain debated, but 4 major subfamilies are recognized. Euphraktini includes the pygmy armadillos, the 6-banded armadillo, and the hairy armadillos. The extinct Macroeuphractus from the Pliocene also belongs to this group. This species is unique among xenarthrans for being adapted to a carnivorous lifestyle. Its living relatives are all omnivores, but Macroeuphractus showed clear adaptations for hypercarnivory. Large conical teeth, an enlarged temporal fossa, more powerful anterior teeth, and a deeper and more robust zygomatic arch. It was a large animal and may have filled the role of apex predator in its environment. It went extinct 3 million years ago when North and South America collided, allowing more specialized predators such as felines and dogs to dominate. Clemaphorinae or fairy armadillos are by far the most bizarre living species. Hyper-specialized for digging, they have evolved extremely robust forearms, long claws, and reduced eyes. They're incapable of walking on land, instead resorting to crawling. Following their divergence, the Toliputinae appeared. This subfamily includes the naked-tailed armadillos, the giant armadillo, and the 3-banded armadillos. Oddly enough, it is alongside these insectivores that we find the now extinct herbivorous armadillos. They are the Glyptodons, Pampathes, and Pachyartherium, all of which were giants. The largest known species was Daedocurus, who averaged 1.4 tons, about the weight of a small car. All these larger species were grazers, which is exactly what helped them reach their huge sizes. They may have filled a role very similar to rhinos in Africa. While smaller armadillos today are found only in tropical and subtropical regions, the much larger species retained heat much better, and could be found in areas as cold as the southern tip of Patagonia. Size wasn't their only difference. They had much flatter faces, more suited for grazing compared to the pointed snouts of modern armadillos, adapted for eating insects. They also lacked the segmented shells of armadillos, instead having one single large dome, possibly a structural necessity at their scale. A segmented shell that large would have inherent weaknesses. For a long time, scientists thought they weren't closely related to living armadillos, but analysis of ancient DNA fragments actually places them within the modern armadillos. They, along with the Pampathes, diverged from living species 30 million years ago. Surprisingly, for most of that time they weren't giants. Their path to gigantism only began after the end of the warm and humid Miocene. The climate shifted toward cooler, more seasonal conditions, and grasslands expanded across South America. Why they evolved to fill the niche of large herbivores remains somewhat mysterious. South America already had a wide range of large herbivores, such as the bizarre Macrauchenia and various notoungulates. One theory suggests that they were successful because their large shells protected them from the monstrous terror birds. Officially called Forus these flightless carnivorous birds were among the largest apex predators in South America during the Cenozoic era. They ranged in height from 1 to 3 meters, with the largest specimens possibly weighing up to 350 kilograms. These birds had enormous heads dominated by tall laterally compressed beaks ending in sharp hooks. They likely used these beaks not just to tear flesh, but to deliver lethal blows to their prey. Recent studies suggest they could reach speeds of 48 kilometers per hour and had exceptional low-frequency hearing, useful for detecting prey over long distances. For millions of years, terror birds dominated South America's grasslands. In the absence of large carnivorous mammals, they filled the apex predator niche alongside predatory marsupials and terrestrial crocodiles. This may explain why heavily armored herbivores like glyptodonts were so successful. Armor was one of the few effective defenses against these relentless hunters. Daedalus possibly had a mace on its tail to fend off predatory birds, though its primary function was likely fighting between individuals. Interspecies competition was also likely why Peltophilus evolved spiky horns on its head. When the Isthmus of Panama formed about 3 million years ago, it created a land bridge between North and South America. This triggered one of the most significant biogeographic events in Earth's history, the Great American Interchange. Animals that had evolved in isolation for tens of millions of years suddenly came into contact. Many South American predators, including the terror birds and most carnivorous marsupials, went extinct when faced with competition from more specialized northern predators like saber-toothed cats, jaguars, and canines. The armadillos thrived. Glyptotherium was widespread across the modern-day United States and Mexico. Their shells, which had evolved to protect them from terror birds and other South American predators, served them well in their new northern territories. But after thriving for tens of millions of years, all the larger species went extinct around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This was part of the late Pleistocene extinction event that saw the disappearance of most large mammals in the Americas. The extinction of glyptodonts has been particularly well studied. Evidence from multiple sites suggests that humans hunted these animals. At sites in Argentina, including the Pampas region, evidence demonstrates that humans hunted Neosclerocaliptus, the Armadillo utatus, and the gigantic Daedalus. From Venezuela, fractured glyptodont skulls show distinctive breakage patterns, consistent with human hunting. These skulls, dated to between 16,000 and 20,000 years ago, show fractures in areas where the cephalic shield becomes thin, suggesting hunters knew where to strike for maximum effectiveness. The evidence also suggests humans used the shells of dead glyptodonts as shelters during inclement weather. Archaeological sites have preserved carapaces with well-preserved elements of the pelvic and columnar region, and one was described as possibly having been eviscerated by humans. Humans bypassed the shell by flipping them over. The underside of glyptodonts was much less protected than the top. They also likely had no fear of predators given their extensive armor, and their slow speed made them very easy to hunt. Researchers estimate that roughly 150 to 170 kilograms of potentially accessible muscles and fat from an adult Glyptotherium could be used as food sources. But was it just hunting? Probably not. The extinction of Glyptodon notably coincides with the end of the Antarctic cold reversal, a period when temperatures dropped before spiking around 12,700 years ago. Following this, temperatures rose and the climate became more consistently humid. These changes made grazing specialized forms like glyptodons, toxodonts, and some ground sloths particularly vulnerable. This raises a critical question. If extinctions were caused by climate changes at the end of the Pleistocene, then why did all these animals survive multiple previous glacial-interglacial transitions, only to vanish at the one when human hunters were present? The answer is likely a combination. Without the hunting, they would have survived the changes in climate, and without the reduction in grasslands, human hunters may not have killed them all. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing or watching one of my other videos.